part of the discussion of the Kyoto Treaty. For example, United States and Japan cited very often the sovereignty conflict with refusing any international carbon tax because of domestic sovereignty concerns. The slogan of the American patriots, no taxation without representation, was once the discussion between the notion of the carbon tax and the discussion on the global carbon market. Similarly, China and India, for example, cited every time their sovereign authority to make development-related choices when they refused to make quantified and binding commitments to reducing emission. A very interesting argument that India and China are putting forward these days, and a very legitimate one in a way, is that more the international community will ask them to take binding commitments at international level on domestic policies, and less they will engage to do, more the international community will let them free of their own decision, more they finally can comply and can implement for climate. So there is really a tension between what we need to finally create at international level as a way of governance and the reivindication of autonomous domestic choices because of autonomous development choices within nations. Again, and very interesting other example is Brazil. Brazil is fighting very, very much against any agreement which would infringe the national sovereignty of Brazil on Amazonia, on the forest. And for instance, as a response, Brazil doesn't want the international carbon market to interfere with domestic decisions on forest, and has created, as a response, a sovereign fund to try to prevent deforestation, but without authorizing any international institution or bodies to participate to the governance of this sovereign fund. So there is many examples where there is this, because of the depth of the necessity of the changes that really are required to confront global challenges, then the sovereignty is reasserted at the same time that we need somehow some kind of delegation of sovereignty to upper levels. For that reason, many countries, and especially now large countries, which are now in this multilateral order much more active, and that United States and Europe has now to share decision with these new countries interacting with them. The models of international governance who are now more supported by this new set and new relation of power has a privilege to members-led agreements, members-led organization, in contrasting to any support to any international organization. And that's very clear that countries prefer member-led models of discussion and institutions than, for example, supporting any global environment organization or reinforcing the Global Environment Fund, for example. So you have this consequence that because of this interaction between the global challenges and the problems of the sovereignty, the model that is really defended by most of the countries is really this notion of member-led agreements. But at the same time, we need, in a way, this reaffirmation of sovereignty if we want to implement international agreements and have some kind of efficiency to respond to environmental challenges. And if we look at, for example, the high sea example, where the problem is the lack of governance and the lack of sovereignty, we are facing a huge problem of implementation of these existing agreements. So I don't want to be too long, but to just show you how it's really a rebalancing vision of how sovereignty has to be redefined if we want, at the same time, legitimacy in the agreements we are conducting at international level and efficiency in their implementation. But clearly, we need a redefinition of this sovereignty. We cannot just stay with the actual definition where states are using the sovereignty argument to prevent any oversight or any looking at their action inside their territory. So, when we look at what is going on international negotiation, we see clearly that what states are aiming at, it's basically a relatively weak agreement with, of course, the difference of the European Union and the defense that European Union is stating for more binding treaties or more binding agreements, is that what countries are aiming at is a weak coordination of domestic policies and domestic decisions. If that is the case for climate, and if it's the result for the Copenhagen Agreement, then the oversight, the verification, the monitoring of this domestic policy began to be the main element of any efficiency in the agreement. So then the international environmental bodies will have keep an increasing watchful eye on what domestic policies are and how they are implemented. So that changed the relationship between the way countries will develop their domestic policies and the acceptance of an international oversight on their policies. So the monitoring aspect begins to be a strong element in the international governance for environment. But finally, if we accept that idea that a certain reaffirmation of sovereignty is part of the solution of, one, the agreement, the consensus building, second, the implementation of the environmental agreements and the response to the global challenges, then in a way, governments will have to be held responsible of their action in front of their citizens on one side and the international community on the other side. So accountability begin to be a sort of major element of this redefinition of the sovereignty. And so we can even go back to a notion where we have to develop a principle of top-down sovereignty, which is a recognition between states of what they are doing and the international oversight of what governments and nation states are delivering for the sake of the international community, but a bottom-up sovereignty as well, rooted in the reality of the national public space and the capacity of citizens to demand to the nation state to be responsible in face of the global challenge and the global response these states have to bring back. So it's really a redefinition of this sovereignty on the infra-state aspect and the overlook of the international community on this new type of definition of what nation states have to respect in terms of the international collective action. Thank you.